Many of you will know me. I'm Audrey Wilson, the Community Engagement Officer at the Scottish Council and Archives, and I just want to welcome you to our 7th webinar in this series, Developing Your Digital Skills. And so today we hear from Jaime Valentine, the founder of OurStory Scotland, and Dom Miller-Graham, who is the chair of OurStory Scotland. Many of you know the community group, but if you don't, OurStory Scotland is a successful community history and oral history project founded in 2002 to record the histories of Scotland's LGBTQ+ communities. This presentation will cover recording, collecting and sharing people's stories. Dom and Jaime will be using Mentimeter. They'll ask a couple of questions and would like you all to respond. So full instructions on how to take part will be explained by Dom, and I'll be on the chat room as well and answer any of your questions. There'll be a code, and I think it's in the chat room already, but we can repeat that. So the presentation today and all our presentations of the series are available on the SCA YouTube channel, and you can find it by going onto our website. You can see that on the welcome slide screen. And please do also follow us on Twitter at @CArchivesScot. As a Zoom webinar attendee, we ask you to use the chat room, but there's also a Q&A button. I will be monitoring this while Jaime and Dom are talking, and I'll collect your questions and we can have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to the two speakers and I will stop sharing my screen.
I'll get James to give me a cue to start sharing my screen when we want me to.
I'll do that. I'm going to do a little more introduction to OurStory Scotland and tell you how we started as well. We are a community-led organisation. We are run wholly by volunteers and always have been. We have no paid staff. And our total purpose is to collect and archive and present the stories of our community. And our community is a community of identification. It's a community of LGBTQ+ people in Scotland. Your community might be a community which is a geographical community much more. For example, I see somebody here is from North Uist. It might be the North Uist oral history resources that you're trying to develop, for example. We have a distributed archive with our non-digital materials, which are mainly things like our handwritten episodes and artworks that we've used, that we've developed through storytelling in National Museums Scotland, and our digital materials, principally our oral histories and our video recordings in the National Library of Scotland. So the distribution of our stories is non-digital and digital. And throughout what we're doing today, one of the things that you might be interested in is the interaction between the digital and the non-digital, because they do very much link up together. And one thing I'd ask you to do, because we always in our storytelling presentations include participation by the people themselves, I would like you to participate in this, and later on we shall be suggesting that you do so. Dom will explain how to do that. Maybe you should have a very old-fashioned, traditional, non-digital material available with you, paper and pencil. And we shall ask you eventually to take one of that and digitize it. So if we look about how we started 20 years ago now, at the end of 2001, it started with a question. And the question was, who is collecting the stories of our community? And you may have asked this question in your own community. What are these wonderful stories I'm hearing? How are they going to be archived? How are they going to be collected? Are they going to be lost for all time when the people themselves are no longer with us? And that was our concern. We knew how much Scotland had changed, particularly for LGBTQ+ people during the previous 20 years. And we saw that the change was very rapid, and we wanted to collect those stories before the people had departed us. And so that's the kind of question we started with. And we started in a rather traditional way by thinking, well, we got to record those stories. We have to do so through audio recordings. We have to do so through oral history. And I would say that oral history is still at the heart of what we do. Oral history means that we value hearing the voices of our own communities from the inside. Rather than people talking about us from the outside, maybe stereotyping us or neglecting us, ignoring us altogether, possibly patronizing us, you have stories told by ourselves. And hearing the voice is particularly important, because what that does is it produces a sense of the feeling of being there. You get a sense of experience, you get the emotion, what it was like to be there at that time, to be me in this situation. And the oral history recordings also have lots of doubts and pauses and anxieties which are shown at the time. That all comes over in a way that it doesn't quite do so when you're writing something. The oral histories can be individual, one-to-one, or they can be dual. We've done oral histories with couples, for example, where we'll interview each of the couple separately and then together. Or it can be small groups which are recorded, not very large groups, because you need to get people to feel comfortable, all of them talking, but maybe a group up to 12 at maximum, I would think. In terms of guidance of how you do oral history, this is not really possible to do that in the short time we've got today, but what I would suggest is that you look at the Oral History Society and see what they produce in terms of guidance for how to do oral histories. It's a wonderful society, and we'll be giving you the link in a handout for this later on. But the main point always with oral history is it's not about you, the interviewer, it's about the interviewee. And the point is to listen. A good oral historian is very good at listening and showing that they're listening and indicating that they're listening without doing all the vocal signs which interrupt the person. So you show it through your face and you're quiet. So the main point is to be quiet and listen. We don't transcribe our recordings because so much gets lost in transcription. You might transcribe some small section of it, but not a whole oral history. Instead, again, guided by the Oral History Society, we produce summaries as guides to listening rather than substitutes to listening. And all our recordings are digital recordings. The very first ones were not. They were done on old-fashioned technology that was available at the time, and it was the best that we could get, which was cassette tapes. But very, very soon we went on to born digital recordings, and those are uncompressed audio files in WAV format. And those are the ones that you should work on when you're editing. Those are the ones that archivists will want to have. I'm not going to go into great detail on how you do archiving, but just to say that if you haven't started doing this and you haven't yet got a place for your recordings or for your oral histories or the stories you're collecting, do think where you might safely archive the stories you collect. It's not really going to be any good having them in an attic somewhere. It's very important that you safely archive them. You ask around local or national museums or libraries to see where you can archive them. And you will find that they will demand that you have an agreement with the person whose stories you're archiving, a copyright agreement. Without that, they won't be able to take your materials. So from the beginning, before you start doing the recordings, make sure you have a copyright agreement. And again, see the Oral History Society for examples of those kind of agreements. I've mentioned particularly oral histories up till now as the way which we focused on, but we do have many other ways in which we have collected people's stories. It's not the only way we've done so. So you can see, for example, on the research part of our website that we've encouraged people to relate themselves or engage in narrative acts in a number of different ways, which are not always just the traditional oral history recording. We've done so, for example, through written stories, from whole autobiographies that people have submitted to us, through episodes which are turning points in people's lives, down to one-liners, which can be very, very revealing, as we'll see later on. Episodes has probably been the single most popular way in which people have submitted their stories. Often these focus on a turning point in a person's life, and they may be handwritten and then transcribed. They may also then be performed, and you will have a digital performance, which is then possibly recorded as well. So that then becomes something else to archive. And an example of this will also be some of the visual storytelling that we do, where you have an interaction between images and words. One of the workshops that we did, I think it was back in 2009, was a mask workshop, where we got people to design their masks, which would indicate both the public face that they had and the more private fears, anxieties, joys, emotions that they also have, and which they don't always share with everybody. And we filmed them talking about their masks and explained them. And those films are then, we've got an extract of that on our YouTube channel, which again, you'll get the link to that through the handout. We also got people to present their stories and read their stories out live at a ceilidh, a wonderful storytelling ceilidh, which brought the storytelling back into the music and dance ceilidhs, which are traditional here in Scotland, of course. And in that you will find, again, we filmed that, and some of those examples are on YouTube. I would particularly recommend you look at Nick's story, a remarkable story that he tells in 7 minutes. But Nick is very, very resourceful person. Nick gave an episode in Aberdeen. That's how we first met Nick. We got a one-liner from Nick at the time. And the one-liner was, I want a photograph to be taken with both my birth certificates. And that already indicates something about Nick's life. And I think Dom is going to share the screen, which shows Nick with his 2 birth certificates there. And what we went on from that to do is we tracked Nick down and we said, Nick, would you like to do a whole oral history interview? And Nick went on to do what was our longest oral history interview, a 4-hour-long oral history interview, which we had to have a break in the middle because the dog was fed up, and the dog started prancing about and saying, I want to go out. And so we had a wee break for that. But we were so intrigued that we would have just gone on in any case. So that's Nick with his 2 birth certificates, and Nick went on to perform his story, which you can see on YouTube, in an amazing 7 minutes of how he went through various transformations in his life. I should also say that Nick eventually won a prize at the Storytelling ceilidh, where we had a story tree, which indicated the various things which you have. What do we go on to next, Dom? Can you go on to the next slide? The next slide shows how you can take digital materials, which are transcripts of handwritten episodes, which were non-digital, and then make them into something, again, non-digital, a work of art, which was a wall hanging, a huge wall hanging. And this is it in an exhibition that we did in 2008 at the Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum in Glasgow, the biggest one of its kind in Scotland. And you'll find all of those, if you were to zoom in, you would go in and you'd find all of those are different extracts from people's episodes where they talk about their lives. And we have some of the visuals which have the people who were telling those episodes as well. And that's together with a whole exhibition of our visual materials. And this is the story tree, which we encouraged at the ceilidh people to write one-liners from their lives on it. And Nick, again, the ever resourceful Nick, wrote, I'm a man with a vagina. And that was one of the ones which we thought was definitely worth reading out at the end. And it summarized a whole process of transition that Nick underwent in his life. The next slide shows an episode which we've used in a particular visual storytelling way. We got people to write episodes and then take maybe one word or one line or a phrase from their episode and to present it through what is called text out. So you got the text from the episode presented as part of a visual storytelling. And this is somebody who came out to his mum while she was doing the ironing. And so you've got the out and you've got the ironing. And what happened during that period was that he was expecting a big drama. Maybe she'd even burn the clothes while she was ironing. In practice, what happened was she just carried on ironing. And he was actually rather disappointed because he expected a big drama. So that's an example of the text out method we've used. In exhibitions, you will have that. You will then go, you'd see the exhibition, you then go in and hone into it and you'd read about it underneath. And this is another example of that. Again, this was originally a work of art done in slate. It was done as part of our Love Out of Bounds project, which dealt with people talking about their loves, which had perhaps been rejected by their family or community. And if you go back to the previous slide, can you go backwards, Dom? I don't know if you go back to that previous slide, you'll see there keep out with the double message of stay being out, but also stay away. And you'll see from the rather somber colors, this is concerned with a funeral where one particular person had been excluded from the family because of their gay identity in this particular case. So it tells a whole story, and the story is underneath. This has been printed out digitally, digital form of it, and then printed out and displayed in various places. It's archived at the National Museums of Scotland in the original non-digital format, and it was printed out and shown at the Scottish Poetry Library at the last time it was done as part of an exhibition. And we also do collage, which again takes text and visuals and puts them together, in this one particularly concerned with the idea of being outsiders and how you do or you don't fit in to different communities. And that also became part of a coming in theme that we've done, where we looked at people who come into our community from outside, particularly people come into Scotland from abroad, from societies where they may have even greater troubles, and they come into Scotland and they form part of our own diverse archives. So those are the different ways we do it. I've already mentioned a couple of themes that we do, which is themes of moving from one place to another, and a theme of love out of bounds, because all of us have experienced those. We've experienced the idea of love out of bounds, which is where you have a love which is rejected by somebody else. Almost everybody has that. So it can include not just LGBT people, but straight people as well. And you also have a theme of moving. And Dom is going to talk about how you should now use those themes in doing your own particular episode and one-liner.
I'll go back. We're going to have 5 minutes, so I'll overlap what we're going to do. Like James has just explained, there's 2 themes, and we're going to invite you to write maybe 3 or 4 lines under one of these themes of your choice. We'll try to make them as open as possible. So we've got the love out of bounds, and as it says there, nearly everyone has experienced a love that has been deemed unsuitable by family, friends, or community. And if you have had a love that has been disparaged, can you write a couple of lines about that? Can you give us an episode, put one together? The next theme was moving stories, and this is really particular to the LGBT community, but many people have that sense of when you move from a place that's so tied to your identity and those are that know you, in inverted commas, when you go somewhere else, you get to be someone else. And again, that's another theme that we've used quite often. Again, if you don't want to do the out of bounds, you can choose a moving stories theme and give us a couple of lines on who do you become when you move away. I'll go on and I'll let you look at that. The point of this is that I'm going to get you to pick a one-liner, and then you can enter that into the presentation and they'll show up on screen for us later. I'll move that forward in a second, but I'll start on some of the stuff that we've had to do during the time of pandemic story telling and collecting. One of the things that's changed is remote recording. The Oral History Societies came up a lot. We've listened to their advice, and we looked into software called Squadcast that has a small fee and membership and limits to it, but it is good. It gives you good audio. There are drawbacks, there are technical problems. Not everyone has good quality computers or mics or earphones, and it does take a bit of time to get it all set up and afterwards editing. The pros are, though, miles mean nothing. So it's so much easier to get those interviews with people. Again, like James said, it's got to be shorter, smaller themed interviews, but they work when you're thinking about creating digital content. Those small 30-second to 30-minute extracts that work so well online. We've used online stories collection through Queer Distance Project, diary entries and episode forms and questionnaires. The one that's most popular is observations, because you can ask people to think of a place that they may not be able to visit right now and to give us what that means to them now at a time that we are kind of at distance. We can't be close as we once want to be. A lot of work doing online events, online storytelling and sharing written stories on online events and exhibitions. There's been so many, and I think a lot of archives have found themselves with new doors opening to them. One for us was doing some training at a HR professionals wellbeing event, and it was HR professionals from local authorities all over Scotland, and we got the opportunity to share some through having volunteers read them live. We shared video, we shared audio, and it was through different themes: schooling, education, employment, and I think healthcare was the other one. It was really good, and it was received very well, very well. The other one was transgressions, using the software today where we can give people extracts or examples from our archive and then ask the audience to feedback. And I think during times of Zoom, audience participation is tough, and it works really well. Another one would be our use of podcasts. We were approached before to make a 50 Years of Rainbow Activism podcast, and it was to be around the theme of LGBT elders, people over the age of 50, and talking about their contributions and their different experiences over that time. And we got commissioned to go travel around. I got 24 interviews, and we were able to edit them down to a good series that made sense and did really give what James said. It let people hear the voice and the tone and the real emotion behind that. And I think the one that I remember was a couple, Charlie and Michael, and like that group interview where you get that interaction between two people who may seem from the outside be very similar, very similar in age and characteristics and identity, but to be so different and have such different opinions and beliefs that they can celebrate. To go back to the presentation and your one-liners, if you want to share yours, there's an opportunity now. If you've had a love that's disparaged from your Love Out of Bounds episode, can you extract a one-liner, a pivotal moment in that episode? And would anyone be willing to share that with us on screen? And you can use your phone or open another window, put in www.menti.com and use the code on screen. I'm quite sure that Audrey has put it in the chat. Fabulous, she has. Anyone going to share theirs? Oh, I should have gone to the synagogue more. I can hear that in a real paternal tone.
I want to hear the whole story.
Yes, exactly.
That's what one-liners do. They draw you in and they intrigue you, and you then want to go and hear the whole story. It's lovely. If people want a bit more time, they should have a bit more time just to write down, and maybe have a couple of minutes to write something down and then come up with this. Or
if you use the other theme of Move-In, you can put that on here and it will show up on screen. If not, we can keep coming back and forward to this, and we can do the Q&A if Audrey wants to come back. We've prepared a PDF with all links to the resources that we've mentioned today, and that will give you a bit more information to the things that we've mentioned, and and the way that we work together. Oh, I've got one. I haven't been myself for years. Oh, I like how myself is on
That's
quote.
brilliant. A lot of people say that. They especially say so in terms of health. I'm not myself, they say. So it's interesting. Your whole idea of yourself is bound up with that. But that's a fabulous quote. That's really wonderful.
I overcompensate so no one sees my disabilities. Ooh.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a thread that runs through a lot of our archive of not being good enough, that not enough. May it be disability or prejudice or gender or a specific personal experience that comes up a lot.
a stranger to my old friends, and that's got the positive and negative side too, isn't it? Where you are more of a stranger to them, and yet at the same time you've opened out into different worlds, and you've got that distance. You've just moved away in that sense as well.
Celebratory tone as well. Try too hard to be liked.
I think we all do that. Perhaps the problem people are the ones that don't try to be liked at all.
I think I found home, but my accent doesn't match. And I think that reinforces what James said about the oral histories. We don't hear people. And
Yes.
I've said that about, I'm a Fifer, so if I go to the community spaces in Edinburgh, I'm automatically an outsider because of how I talk. I can really relate to that, really, really relate to that. Type community, I look up. Oh, I look up. Oh, so much there. So much in that. I'm going to jump back and see if anyone has put any more in here. I haven't felt present for years. That makes me think of COVID and lockdowns. I work as a counsellor, and a lot of people have that feeling of not processing, not catching up with ourselves yet. But this, it makes me think of all the lost loves that we've had over the last 2 years as well, things that we've not been able to reach and hold and be seen to do that. My mind is just a sea of fog. I've had that sort of love, for sure.
The awful thing is sometimes when people disparage the love, they're right. They're actually right. We had a wonderful story from a Pakistani woman who fell in love with somebody at university who was not part of her community. And she defied her parents, who said, he's not right for you. And she found eventually he had such a stereotyped view of what a Muslim woman would be, obedient to him and all the rest of it, that he was an absolute nightmare. And she had to say, my parents were right. It really hurt her to say my parents were right. But about this particular person, that was the case.
That as well, I'm finally myself now that I've escaped my family. That there's a quote that I use it all the time from an episode, and it's somebody said, we were unchained from friends and family, and just to use that unchained from that to express the freedom that they felt when they were no longer in that space.
So much, yeah, that's right. And so much comes from expectations of people around you, and the fact you are trying to be liked by your local community, because the price of not being liked or by your family, because the price of not being liked is awful. And then finally, if you move away, you can escape some of that. You lose something at the same time. So there's a double edge to it.
It reminds me of the coming in project when we talked about people coming into the community from elsewhere, and there was often that friction of what they lost, but what they gained. So many people came to Scotland to have a family and to live safely when we got that AAA status.
We had a number of people from the Polish community that said they could not be themselves back in Poland, and that's one reason why they're in Scotland. And that's also one reason why we did our coming in project, because we realized that in the future people might not be able, through lack of freedom of movement, to come into Scotland in the same way.
I had a conversation with a Polish immigrant to Scotland who's a policewoman, and she was talking about marching in Pride in her uniform, and she got really upset because back home she couldn't be a policewoman, she could never march in Pride, and how that really got to me, because that's part of our story as well. That's what we're all about, is celebrating the remarkable remarkable stories. I mean, all those meanings intersect. Love it.
These are absolutely fabulous stories.
Amazing.
And the one about I become anonymous, but being part of a small community has its benefits, but you lose privacy. That sums up a huge number of stories, a huge number of stories, the double-edged aspect to it. And I love this, I can't escape myself. That speaks huge volumes. But the self itself can change over time, and then you don't escape that one either.
I was going to say which self, which one.
Exactly.
A bit less of who I was, and a bit more of who I will become. And that event, The Transgressions, was about that, and how we're all in that place of transition constantly, all of us, in some way, shape, or form. And there's that. We could learn a lot from the trans community on how to embrace that and be proud of that, and really like the one before about potential, about you want to. Oh, just I get excited about that, about the frictions, those two, the fork in the road.
One person has written they're not quite sure how to actually input their material. This is Gloria, I think, has said that. So what do? You click on the website link that's in the chat.
Open another window and put in the website at the top, www.menti.com, and use the code. I'm guessing you've done that because you're trying to input it. There should be an easy way to input it. And on this one, I think if you've done one, you're only allowed to do one. We didn't want to be overwhelmed and have thousands coming in quick. So if you've already done one, it won't allow you to do it again. But it should be self-explanatory on the screen. It should be pretty bog standard, easy to do on your phone or on another window. I think Audrey's doing it just now.
Yeah.
You can see on your phone.
Oh, there's one under the move away. I think it's more of the Love Out of Bounds one, really. It says they said I had to choose him or them. I think that's that's definitely a Love Out of Bounds one.
Unless they're talking about themselves. I use
yes.
they, him pronouns, and sometimes where I live, I can explain pronouns and people will just not care without any disrespect. But elsewhere, my pronouns are respected.
Wonderful double meanings there.
Yeah, I can relate to that. See, with the power of a one-liner, see what this is our point. We should get these made into badges, fridge magnets, something, make a collection.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine this on a story tree with all of these here, like the kind of prayer trees they've got in Japan where you put your wishes and desires at a shrine. If all these were put up and people can go around and read them, it's absolutely fantastic. It's a wonderful display.
Also other like programs that you can use really easy. Most people are familiar with Jamboard. It's a Google Chrome's app, and you can use that really well to have an audience give you pictures and post-its, and they can draw, they can write text. I've done it from a few Zenin events, and they've come up with digital zines. They've been used for training for healthcare providers. The one which pops out is mindfulness for the trans community, and it was both experiences and things they wish to pass on to practitioners. And it was all done very, very similar to this. Unchallenged, ooh, like that. When you take a one-liner and you give it steroids and you just need the one word. Good.
That would make a wonderful one, wouldn't it? As a visual story, if you had that with either a photograph or with a collage or something like that was done, and you had that, and you then went and it had Unchallenged on it, and then you went in and read the wider episode of which that is a part, that would be perfect.
And then if people have the opportunity to give their reflections on that prompt, if they could give their response, times that they've been unchallenged, what that's been like, and that could just grow arms and legs in a beautiful, beautiful organic way. I'm going to jump back to the other one. I am always second best. Oh, gosh, could feel that one. It diminishes you. It does, absolutely. I could feel that. Feel that. Absolutely. It's interesting how I don't know if people are a bit squeamish about talking about love, especially love that's been disparaged, or if the other theme is just much more relatable to be able to move places. What we're like for time, Audrey?
Are okay. I wanted to say, Dom, Gloria has posted her comment from Minty onto the chat room, and I was just trying to do it for Gloria.
Right, right.
Yeah, maybe now I've got your attention. She just wanted to say, she wanted to add, where did I belong when I was a teenager, was her one-liner.
Oh, wow, yeah. I think that makes me think of that transgressions as well, like being in a teenager or an adolescent is that space in between being a kid and an adult. And I remember being in high school and saying, I think I was maybe 14, and saying, I'm in that place, I'm not a kid, but I'm not at that 16 milestone yet. That meant you got more rights and you got a little bit of respect with it. And I felt very in between, very in limbo. So I can relate to that.
It also shows the importance of collecting stories of people at all ages.
Yes.
When we started out, we wanted to collect the stories of older people who were going to pass away within 10 or 20 years' time, and some of them did, I'm afraid, of course. But we then realized it was very important to collect the stories of young people too, because stories told by young people are not the same. And it's not just that they will grow up and tell the same stories. They won't tell the same stories 20 years on. So you have to capture those stories at the time. You have to capture all ages.
And because of the work that Jaime was doing when I was growing up, honestly, we've got a fantastic opportunity to do follow-up oral history interviews. Like, times have changed since 20 years ago. And that's, what have we done with the rights that we've won? How have they impacted you? What are you being an activist for now? What do you think is the next thing we're arguing for? And good opportunity for that intergenerational work, and to have those different identities sit down, and we have different age groups have that conversation. Jaime can give you an example. Was it Amy Tooth and Who talking about space in Glasgow?
Yes, it was Margaret and Amy and Diane, and 3 generations of women around their 60s, 40s and 20s talking about places that they'd met in Glasgow. And it was very, very revealing, the change of places over time and over a generation. Wonderful interview.
I had a great opportunity to hear an interview with By Plus Glasgow from 14 years ago, and then getting to interview them again for the podcast series and asking them how things have changed in the community as by erasure or by phobia, and getting, it's so interesting to hear how things may have changed for the better or worse. Really, really interesting. And that the distance of time, it shows so much has changed, so much just personal. Love it. I'm getting excited and rambling now.
I was going to say, sorry, I'm going to just, because we haven't got very long, but I do have a question, and it was, over the 20 years that you have been doing this, have there been any changes in the type of stories you have collected? I know that you sort of refer to different age groups, but I'm also thinking about the law have changed during that time as well. So I imagine there could be a change in stories.
Well, there's clearly a change in stories, because you couldn't have talked about things such as civil partnerships and marriage in 2002 or 2001, and people were tending to talk about the previous 20 years and the huge changes that had happened there. But I would say one of the really, really key changes that has happened over this period has been that you've got new ways of identifying yourself, new language which is not available. So 20 years ago, people were not using language such as non-binary. Nowadays, we find that many people are using that. They have a much more gender fluid idea of themselves. They're not so fixed in terms of ideas of expectations of masculinity and femininity. They're wanting to create their own particular space within that. And that's particularly true of the younger people who've contributed to OurStory Scotland, and actually joined OurStory Scotland as volunteers recently, because we've had a large influx of volunteers as well, which has been absolutely wonderful.
And the thirst for the stories and the material as well. Things like I grew up under Section 28, but I've been in a number of schools presenting these stories, and like the younger generation that Jay mentions, they often don't believe how things once were. So to have that like evidence to back up these recollections, yeah, powerful.
The other thing I would say is that we started out at a time, in terms of taking on what Dom was saying about schools, when we started off collecting stories about that, we thought, well, you know, people have it much easier these days. Actually, that's not the case. And we found that's definitely a stereotype. So the idea that in the past you got terrible bullying and now you don't, actually the bullying continues, but it continues in different format, and in some ways is even more insidious with the use of social media. So that needs to be recorded too.
We can't hear you.
Sorry. I'm going to say I've got one more question actually, and it was, do you think that the Scotland's Government Year of Stories 2022, do you think that has increased the interest of capturing people's stories, or has that got anything to do with it, or not? No.
I think so far. That's not really.
I think that's what I think they're saying it. I think they're saying it because perhaps they are thinking about it as a community archive, that they are thinking about, you know, this is a very good way to engage with your community, and it fits in with the Scottish government's.
I think use any excuse you can,
Yes.
basically.
Right.
Any excuse you can to do it, to try and get a wee bit of funding. You don't need very much funding. Mostly you need volunteers. But to get good audio equipment to record with, you need a bit of funding for that. So if you can put in funding and say, we're doing this as part of Scotland's Year of Storytelling next year, then fine, definitely do it. Use it as an excuse, but also try and keep going long term, because then you get this wonderful ability to go back and also re-interview people again years and years later, or take up a theme, or see the changes that have happened.
But there's also as well, there's a whole angle of like the Carnegie Trust on research about community archives and giving people that space to create worth for their story, for their community. It improves people's mental health and communities' mental health. People's citizenship improves. They take part in their community and decision making more because they think that their voice and their past have worth. And especially for minorities, that is life changing, revolutionary. And like I said, I'm from Fife. We're not Edinburgh, Glasgow. We don't have those metropolis. So giving people that opportunity to say your regional voice is also valuable. It gives so much worth. It really, really does. And it does impact people's mental health positively. Big way.
And we often find that one of the responses people give after a session is, nobody's listened to me like this before. I've never had my story heard. Often beforehand, they say, I have no story to tell. And then after an hour and a half of telling you the story, they're kind of surprised that they do.
I'm going to say we are running a little bit over time. I just want to remind everyone that there is going to be a PDF sent out. I will also be sending out a feedback form, and very much hope people will fill this in, and I will share it with OurStory Scotland as well. There was a very nice little comment just in the chat room from Ian saying, thank you all for the creative ideas and the practical tips. And I just want to say, yes, very much. Thank you, both of you, for coming along today and giving up your time. This recording will be available, and I'm sure lots of people will want to watch it again. But thanks for everyone for coming along. Next Thursday is the last in the series of developing your digital skills, and we're looking at digital sustainability. So it's actually how to look after your digital files, which is very, very important. But thanks everyone, and hope to see you next Thursday. Bye.
Thank you.